So that's ready now to go to one side. Okay, so we are gonna work on the next sample, which is the bodice with a gathered setting sleeve and a 2 centimeter cuff and a placket opening. We've also got a Peter Pan collar for this one as well. So I've got all my bits together and cut out ready. I have, in preparation, sewn my bodice together. Now, before I put anything into or on this, I'll give it another press because it's been folded in the box. So if you have got your bodice cut out, if you stitch the shoulder seams together and the side seams together, what you'll need next is the cuff pieces cut out. So with the cuff on this one, we've got a button and a loop. So I've got 4 pieces all together. So 4 pieces all together, the cuff for the right side, the cuff then that's against the skin on the wrong side. It's got 1 buttonhole stand on because the other side has got a loop. So I've got 2 pieces that have got interfacing on, medium, soft interfacing, and then 2 pieces that haven't got any on. So put them to one side. And then I have got the sleeve placket that's cut out for either side. And I have cut out the Peter Pan collar that we made a pattern for. So one side has got the interfacing on. So there's 2 pieces with interfacing and 2 pieces without. I'll put them on top of each other so I know where they're going. So that's my Peter Pan collar. You've got the under collar and you've got the upper collar on both sides. So they're cut out and interfaced ready. And then I have got my lovely sleeves that are going to be gathered in on the armhole. So I'm just going to move this cable out of the way and then we can get going. There we go. So what we'll start with first is we'll prep the collar. So the collar we'll get ready first. If you wanted to add in some piping around the neckline, you can do. I might show you that. So we've got I've just got some white pre-made piping, and all I will need is enough to go around the outer edge of the collar on both sides. So if I just pull some out already, I'm going to give myself a little bit extra and not trim anything down until it's all trapped in the seam. So I'm just following the edge round so I know how much I need, and then I'll start pinning and attaching it in 1 second. So if I get my scissors and snip that bit. And so I've got 2 pieces the same, so I'll cut the next bit the same. And put that back. Ooh. Put a pin in so it stays together. And then I will want my zipper foot onto my machine. It's right at the bottom. If you've got a piping foot, you can use piping foot. So all we're going to do is pin and attach. So I'll get that set up there, and then we will pin around the edge of the collar for the piping to get trapped into. Now I'm going to do it in 2 stages. If you're confident enough to trap the piping within the collar, go for it. If not, if you want to just watch how we get pinned in and stitched. So just before you do start, make sure that with your sewing machine you've got a full bobbin, and then you're not having to change it throughout your project, or if there's lots and lots of sewing you might need to, but always start with a fresh bobbin, because then it'll just save you changing it later on. So I'm just going to give these a quick press, because like I say, they've been folded up in the folder. So I'll just give them a nice press so they're flat again. So my seam allowance is 1 centimetre, and the seam allowance on the tape, on the piping card, is about 1.5 centimetres. So what I'm going to do, zoom in a little bit, I'm going to sit a bit of the tape just off the raw edge. So it's about half a mil off the edge. So I know exactly where my stitch line sits. My stitch line is 1 centimetre, and I know my piping is going to sit right on the stitch line rather than too far over it, and I have to increase my seam allowance. So all I'm doing is pinning all the way around the edge, following the curve. If you have piping, you can always trim it down first. Take half a mil off so you know that you're going right up to the edge. That's fine. Piping is designed to go around corners. However, if you've got a sharp corner, you might need to just cut into your tape just to give it a bit of encouragement to go round. So I'm hoping that I don't actually need to do that on this one, but we'll see. We'll see how it's sitting in a second. So you want this on both sides. So I chose a nice big Peter Pan collar, regretting it slightly now, having to pin this all the way around the edge. Okay, so that's one pin. So I'll show you this one side first, because then I can, and you'll do the same to both sides. So that's all pinned in. I'm going to flick over to the sewing machine. Tilde, can you go in the room, please, baby? You need to be quiet then. Can you be quiet? No singing. Okay. No, not when we were talking. Yeah. Okay, so I've got my zipper foot on, and my setting is 2.5 length. And what I'm going to do is pop my foot right against the edge of the piping, and then stitch that in place. I'm working around. I'm just following the piping cord, and all the time keeping the foot pressed up against the piping. You maybe can't see as well, but if you are putting piping on, you'll definitely feel it. And what better time to put piping in a sample if you've never done it before. I've just increased my stitch length slightly, so it moves around a little bit quicker. And then when you've finished, backstitch at the end. Tilde, you're gonna have to go out. You're too noisy. Good girl. So now we've got the piping on, we need the under collar. And we're going to pin that in place following the curve. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to trim that piping down slightly so I can see my raw edge of my fabric. So like I said, I'm not going to trim the ends off, only when it's being attached to the bodice is when I'm going to trim that off. So I'll go again, right sides together, following around the raw edge. So seam allowance, raw edges together. And when I stitch and attach the collar this time, I'm going to follow my original line that I've just done as a guideline. So I can see where the piping cord is, and I can get really close into it. So by attaching the piping cord to the piece of the collar with the interlining on, it's just a little bit more stable and secure. So your piping goes on really nicely. Just get right to the edge there. So again, I'm just going to flip over to the machine and stitch the collar on. Back stitch at the beginning and the end. So I'll just move the camera and then you might be able to see a little bit better. So what I'm doing is I'm keeping my finger against the piping cord so it's pushing it right up onto that zipper foot. Taking my pins out as I go so that I know that nothing's moving, everything's in place. And so now we've got the one side of the collar. I just put the other side to one side. And because we're going to be turning it through the right side, we'll just have a little look to see how it's sitting, to make sure we've not caught anything and that we're close enough. And then we'll go back to the inner construction techniques. So I can see that everything's looking all right. Nothing's caught. And when I'm looking and feeling, I can feel the bulk here. I can feel bulk around the curve. So I need to go back inside, and you can see that we're not getting a really smooth, neat curve. So what we're going to do is we need to cut out some of the fullness. So one thing I like to say is clip a valley and notch a mountain. So let me just get this flat and I'll explain. So here's a mountain. So if your seam allowance edge is bigger than the inside the seam allowance of where it's going to be sitting into, you need to cut notches and cut away some of the seam allowance so that when it's turned in, seam allowance will sit nice and close together, and it'll be nice and smooth. If you have a valley, so the opposite way around, where the seam allowance is smaller, you need to clip into it, so just straight lines, so that then that can open out. So I'm going to go around and I'm just on the curves. I'm going to take some notches out, some notches of fabric out. So notches are your triangles. So you want to be doing it with some nice sharp snips with a good point. And what I'm doing, I'm cutting right up to the stitch line. Up to but not through the stitch line, so that everything stays intact, but we're taking away that bulk from the outer edge. So the more uniform your notches are, the more uniform your curve will be. So if you've got a curve that's quite deep, quite tight, if you think of notches right next to each other, and then when they turn through, they'll be nice and smooth. If you've got a smoother curve, if you keep your notches further away but still consistent, so maybe an inch in between each one or a couple of centimeters in between each one, you gauge it as you stitch in. So I know that the curve on the end is quite deep, whereas it goes a lot smoother around here. So what I'm going to do is every 2 centimeters, I'm going to put a notch in. And then if there is that extra, it'll be taken away within that notch when it gets turned through. The idea with the notches is that if you cut right up to the stitch line, you'll get your lovely curve as well. If you're just taking out the allowance at the end, that'll stop it from being bulky, but not necessarily give it a nice curve to go into. So I'm going to come up to the curve. So I'm coming up to the curve again, which is tighter. So I'm going to go back to putting the notches together. So crocodile teeth, if you like. It's really important not to skip this stage because it makes a huge difference to the finish of your garment. You can trim your seam allowance down. You can grade your seam allowance as well. But just as you're doing, just check onto the right side that you've got a lovely curve and you haven't got lots of fullness from your seam allowances sitting on the edge of your collar. Just do one more further up along this edge. Put that to one side. So we've notched all the way round. We've got our edges that are coming up to the edges. So now I'm going to turn around to the right side. And I'm going to lay it flat and I'm going to give it a press this time. So I'm pushing out my edges. It's feeling so much better now. It's not as bulky. And that piping is sitting out really nicely. So I'm going to give it a press. And I do like these llamas. They're very good. Very well behaved. So that at the minute is my collar. That's the front, and that one there is the back. So that's looking really nice. So if you want to do piping, you would do that on both sides. So follow that progression and that technique. Still leave your ends on for now until we get the collar attached to the neckline on the bodice. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to put this to one side and show you if you are doing a collar without piping. So I'm just going to press the two pieces so they're nice and neat. And so then the first step is to put right sides together. So right sides to right sides. And then put a couple of pins in. Ready to stitch. Everything in place. So now that that's pinned, I'm gonna flick over back to the sewing machine. I'm gonna put my standard foot back on. And I'm gonna stitch. So my seam allowance is 1 centimetre. Okay, so now that that is stitched in place, we are then to take the pins out and cut your notches. So I'm going to put a couple in. So I'm just cutting my notches where I've got my deeper curves. Again, I'm keeping them close together, and then I'm going to start spreading it out as we go into a straighter part. So that is the notches cut out, and then I'm going to turn to the right side and give it a press. Let's just move all them bits to the side. So round to the right side. Really pushing out those corners. All the way along the collar edge. So just to say, can you see here how it looks quite pointy here, here, and then it's flat, and underneath I can feel a bit of bulk. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go into that part and add another notch. So just in between that inch to make it, pull it out so it's looking a bit better. And then just checking as I'm going along that I'm happy with how it is sitting. And then I'm going to give it a press. Give it a press and then have another look at it. So I'm just going to go back into it in a couple of places because I'm not happy with how it's looking. I want it to be a bit smoother. So where I've spread out my notches, I'm just putting a few extra in. So you can see the difference there. It looks more of a curve rather than little straight jaggedy points. If you want to add a top stitch, you can. I'm not going to add a top stitch to mine. I'm happy without a top stitch. Sometimes it can define it really nice. Sometimes it can look a little bit messy. So if you are thinking of top stitching, use your edge stitch foot or your top stitch foot, just to give you that helping hand, or 1/4 inch foot, some sort of guide. Set up your guide on your machine so that you can really make a nice top stitch line, so it all stays in the same distance away from your fold. So I'm just trimming a couple more notches into here. So it really, like, it does take a while to do your inner construction techniques, but it makes a difference. So get yourself a video on, or a TV program, or the radio, and just have a listen to that, and you'll soon get into a rhythm, and you'll be stitched, you'll be trimmed round, ready to go on to the next section. Or you can just listen to me go on. Okay, so that's snipped. I'm happy with that. Let's get all that rubbish to one side so the rest of the garment's not picking it up. Have a little bit of a tidy around, so we've got a nice clean workstation. I should move my pins to the other side. I need to get a magnet for them. Right, so we're all good. So final look at the collar. Nice curves. One more press just for that side. And so we've got collar with piping and collar without piping. So whichever one you go for, prep both your pieces, and then it's a good way to start, because it's a quick finish, where you can get it looking really good, ready to go on to the next part. So there we go. There's the 2 collar pieces. I'm going to put them to one side, and we're going to start with the sleeve. So I've marked on the top, which is the sleeve, which is the back, and which is the front, so that I'm putting it into the right spot. I'm only going to be looking at one sleeve, focusing on one sleeve. If you're cutting 2 out and doing 2, that's good. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to mark in where my placket is going onto my sleeve. So it's going to have a little pleat in, and it's going to have a placket cut into it. So I'm opening my sleeve out. Now it's pretty big because I've got a gathered sleeve head. So what I'm going to do on my sleeve, now this is the left hand side, and the back piece is this side. So this is the back. So I'm just going to write on that this is the back. So this is one of the iron-on pens, so it does move if you need it to move. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn my sleeve to the wrong side out, and I've marked the middle of the sleeve, which is my middle finger line, and my placket is going to go to looking at it now on the wrong side, it's where my right hand is, so it'll be on that side. The middle, the higher part of the placket is closest to the middle, and what I'm going to do is measure from the edge. I've got a 1 centimeter seam allowance included, so I'm going to measure 2.5 centimeters away plus my seam allowance, so 3.5 centimeters altogether. And I'm going to put a mark there because that's where the edge of the placket is going to go. What I'm going to do now before I do anything, so before I attach anything, I'm going to be marking on all the markings onto my pattern. Just check what that measurement is. 3. So okay, so I've got my placket, which is going onto my sleeve. So the sleeve that I'm working with is the right hand side, so the right side of the body. So what I need to do first is put all my markings onto my sleeve, onto my placket even. So I'm just marking where everything is. So I am going to be pressing in a minute, so it would probably be better to use a different way of marking up. If you're using the friction pens, whatever they're called, because you will be pressing, it might not be a good idea. So transfer all your information across. So in at the line at the top, closer, not farther away. In at the line at the top, so here you need to cut into and up to the line. So you can see there where I've cut it, and you need to do the same on your fabric. So I've interlined this just to stiffen it up slightly. Now I've not interlined a placket before, so I'm trying it out this time just to see if it makes any difference. Let's just lower that down a little bit. So that's all my parts laid in, and so I'm going to give it a press now so I'm pressing back certain sections ready to get the placket ready to go on. So I'm going to press the seam allowance of either side back. So that's the outer edges. And I'm going to try really hard just to catch the line and not the rest of the hem. And so the other side as well. Let's just zoom out a little bit more so I'm not going off the screen. And then I am going to fold in this top section and give that a press. Just going to cut right up to that line. So I've got those 3 outer edges sewn together, and then I'm going to be folding in the point at the top. So the inner edge has gone in, and I'm going to fold it over to make like a square. So I'm bringing the top corner down to my fold, and I'm going to press that in place. So if you've got a fabric that's quite nice, like presses quite nice, that always comes in handy, especially at this point of a placket. So now I've got that side down, I'm going to press and fold the other side down. So I'm pressing in. I think I did that a bit quick, that's why I'm just doing it again. So I'm pressing in one diagonal. I'm going to do the same to catch the other side. So I'm bringing that top point now back down, which should now give me a point on the top. Now, if it pops back open, it's all right because you've still got that guide in there, that guide fold. So the next step after we've pressed those pieces back is to stitch. So to mark up and to stitch it on the sleeve. So I'm going to put that to one side for a second and get my sleeve. So I'm working on the sleeve that's going to go in onto my right arm, and I've got the wrong side facing up. Now it depends on where you want your placket. What I've done, I've measured from the edge of where I do want my placket to go, and right from the outer edge. So I've got a seam allowance, which is 1 centimetre, and then I've measured up. So it's 6.5 centimetres from the edge of the sleeve where my marker is, and that's where my placket is going to be. So if it was the paper pattern, the marking is where I'm going to cut in and open it out. So it would end up looking like that. Okay, so I'm going to measure up because I want to keep it parallel with that seam edge. Well, it's not quite parallel, it's coming up a little bit more straighter, so you can keep it the same as that edge. It's maybe a bit too far to keep it with the middle finger line. So if you gauge it, you can either go parallel to the edge or bring it up so it's parallel to the edge that it's going into. So I'm going to aim for, where's my pen gone? I'm going to aim for a line. Now, if it's similar to mine, I'll measure it for you. So it's 6.5 at the bottom, And then if I measure up, so the line that I'm stitching on is, it's going to be 8.5. So if I measure up 8.5, because that's where my line's going to go, I'll just iron the rest off. And then if I measure across again at the same point, it's 8. So it's gone from 6.5 up to 8 if you want to draw the same line in that I'm drawing. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to pin my placket to the wrong side. So this is the wrong side of the fabric. And it's going to be the right side of the fabric to the wrong side of the fabric. And what I'm lining up is the line that I'm going to be cutting, which I've just put a dash across. That is going to be lined up on my opening. So I'm just going to put a couple of pins in. And then the next step is going to be to stitch that in place all the way around the rectangular shape. So I'm going to flick over to the other camera and stitch that in place. So I'm just using my normal stitch setting again. So with the sleeve being curved, just forgot to say then, what I've done, I've just brought the placket down slightly, a couple of mils, so that you can see. So I'm getting right onto that point at the top. I'm stopping, leaving my needle in and rotating the fabric around and stitching straight across again then to the next point. Needle in, foot up, rotate around. And then straight down to the bottom. Making sure that there is a back stitch there. So coming back across to my placket, next step is where the rectangular, so I've just stitched the rectangular shape, and now I'm going to cut up the middle and up the triangle into the 2 points. And open that up, and then everything goes through and round to the right side. And so I'm going to flip my sleeve round to the right side. And then I'm going to start to press. I'm pressing my seam allowance into the placket, just making sure that it's all through and neat. Ooh. So I'm going to mark where my middle point is. And I'm going to fold up. So no, I'm not going to do that. So I've got my placket, and what I'm going to do, my seam allowance is going into my placket, and I've got my seam allowance which is pressed back, and then I did have a fold line down the middle of that, which is going to bring that folded edge right up to the stitch line of, and cover the stitch line of the, when we've just stitched them. So I'm going to pin that in place because I'm going to be stitching it in 1 second. I'm not, it's fine. So I'm gonna top stitch down the edge here now. So if I just flick the camera over, you'll be able to see. So I'm just gonna line up in my machine for an edge stitch, to top stitch, edge stitch. If you've got a particular foot that you like to use, go for that one. And then back stitch at the top. So we've got that side prepped and in. Zoom in so you can see. So that bit is prepped and in, so it's neatened on the wrong side, neatened on the right side. I'll just cut those edges off. And then for the next side, so what I'm going to do is, my seam allowance has gone into the placket side. Now I should, looking at this, have a fold line which has come off. So the fold line is straight down the middle. To that edge. And so I'm going to fold that into my seam allowance. and then I'm going to fold that back. So fold my seam allowance into the placket. My folded edge that I pre-pressed, I'm going to bring back to the edge, so where the seam allowance is, and I'm just going to move that one out of the way so I can press it. So I just give that a fold, a press. It's pressed up at the top. And then I'm going to put a couple of pins in to keep it in place, and I'm going to stitch. So I'm taking and I'm pinning all the way up to the top. And all the way up to the point, and then I'm going to stitch all the way round, so all the way straight up and round, catching in that point up at the top, all the way around to the other side, and then down. Probably down to where I've just marked it, which is 1.5 centimeters down from the point. So I'm just going to flick over to the camera and I'm going to stitch that in place, and then this is the last step of the placket. So back stitch at the beginning and the end. If you want to go across with a little box, you can do. I'm going to, because I've missed a little bit of this side. So hopefully it'll catch it all in. And then your placket is done. Okay, so we have got the placket stitched in place. So now what we're going to do is bring the side seams together. Well, not the side seams, but the seams of the sleeve together and stitch them in place. So I'm going to put a pin at the top and the bottom, and then just a couple in the middle. So not too many pins. and stitch them in place. So if I just show you the sewing machine. So centimetre seam allowance. And then back it over to this side, and if you are finishing your seams, although this is a sample, you can finish it with any technique that you want. This is the time that you'll do it. So stitch, then press, then finish your seams. So all I'm going to do, because I've not got a sleeve roll for this one, is I'm going to just make sure that the middles of the sleeves, I'm not going to press an edge in down there. I'm just getting the middle of the sleeve and the seam. So that's pressed open. So we're going to work on the cuff still. So we're looking at the wrong side now. And so this may need a pleat in, it may not. I'm just measuring it. We've got a buttonhole stand on one side. So I'm going to turn it round to the right side. Seam allowance will go over, so my seam allowance is going to hang over, and I'm going to pin all the way around. Now if your cuff is smaller than your actual garment, it'll mean that you'll want a bit of a pleat in there somewhere. So usually with a vent placket, you do have pleats into the sleeve. So where the vents there, the sleeves there, so you can see naturally forming, there's some pleats to the, so I'm looking at the sleeve. I've got my seam of the sleeve is here, my opening, so my vent is just there, and then I'm going to fold some pleats in. I'm going to do 2 pleats. And I'll just fold it and then I'll show you. So I'd cut my sleeves out prior to doing the patterns in the class. So mine will be slightly different to yours. I think mine's a little bit bigger than yours. So I'm just folding out the excess, and I'm going to be stitching over it. And so as a knife pleat, so they're all going in the same direction. I'm just trying to get 2 equal pleats. So I've got that pinned in, so I'm going to stitch in place. Just have a look at it on the right side with the pleats in. So my pleats are going towards my placket. So my seam allowance is 1 centimetre again. So I'm going to just and then back to the cuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give it a press to set that seam. So I've opened out the seam allowance. Just move that across so you can see. I'm just going to give it a quick press to set the seam, but not because it's going to be stitched that way. It's just so we can get a nice sharp fold. And then we want the right side of the cuff to the right side of the cuff. I'm just going to press that because it's so I'm just pressing on the right side. And so we're going to go before we stitch, we will turn the seam allowance up. Just to make it easier because it is a small hem. And then we're going to go right sides together on the cuff and stitch straight across there. So just straight across on the edge, because we're going to be putting a loop in the other side. And then back on to the cuff. So if we open out and press, so I'm going to press the seam open. So we get a nice sharp edge. So there's not much to play with because it is a narrow hem. Give that So we're going to have a button and a loop on. So we just need to decide which side the button's going on and which side the loop is going on. So over the top, that one wants to be the loop and underneath wants to be the button. So the over the top one where the loop's going on, we're going to trap the loop in the seam. And just get some thing to make the loop out of. Okay, so I've got some card for the loop, and this is going to go into the seam allowance. So I'm just going to pop the loop in. I want it to be big enough to go around my buttonhole. My button, sorry. So my button is about 1 centimetre. So I want it to be able to go over my buttonhole and catch in place. So I'm just marking up where I think it needs to go. and that's set in the middle. I'm going to trap that in my seam. So I've pinned that in where I want it to go, and then I'm going to bring the cuff piece across and I'm going to stitch it together all in one go. So I'm going to trap in the loop on this side, and then I'm going to stitch on the other side the seam allowances together. So I'm going to stitch making sure I start from that point and come all the way down so that my cuff is flush to my sleeve. And then I'm going to cut the stitch the opposite side in the same way, but this side I'm just catching the I'm just going to take it steady because I've got a couple of pins in there that I don't want to catch. I'm cutting the corners. I'm trimming my seam allowance down, ready to turn through. I'm just teasing those points out, not pushing too hard. And so that's my loop, and my button will sit on there. Okay, so what I need to do now is I need to pin the cuff in. So all the seam allowance is sitting down into the cuff, and I'm pinning the cuff right up to the stitch line. So now I would hand stitch or top stitch that. Totally up to you what you do. I'm just going to leave it for now and come back to it at the end so that I can get on and show you the next bit. In fact, I think I'm going to top stitch it. So I'm just going to run a top stitch straight across. So that's caught on both sides. So I'm just going to take my pins out and trim any threads off, and then get my button ready to attach on. I'm just putting a pin to keep it together so I know where I want my button to go. I just get my button. So I'm just sitting my button, that's how I want it to look. So with my pen, so the middle point of my button is there. So that's the line and where I want my button to be. And it wants to be in the middle. So I'm going to get some thread and attach that on. So I'm only catching the top. So straight in through the point, back stitch. So you don't want too much thread because it can get caught up. So back stitch will stop it from coming undone. And then if you get your button and decide which way that's going. So there we go. So this is a shank button, but if you've got a flat button, you can attach it on, or if you've got a machine that attaches everything for you, go and use that, no problem. So long as your button's attached on, it doesn't matter how it gets attached on. So I'm just going to go straight through the buttonhole, catch under the button with the fabric, and then through the button. And with it being a shank button, I'm going to catch it a couple of times so that it's in and secure. And then finish that off with a back stitch again. And so the button and the loop are on together. So that's the cuff and the placket done. And then we're going to go up to and gather the sleeve head. So I'm just going to tidy up my space ready to gather the sleeve in. So I'm going to do a gathering stitch all the way around the top of the sleeve head. I'm going to put it on a machine tacking stitch or gathering stitch, which is the biggest stitch on the machine, and I'm going to run from the seam of the sleeve all the way round, 2 rows of stitching within, as best I can, within the seam allowance. With the seam allowance is only 1 centimetre. Evie tail's quite long, so you've got plenty to work with. Just got a... So I've got my gathered stitch in there. I'm going to separate my top and bottom threads so that I can start to push the gather up and through into the sleeve head. Now I want to make sure that I've got my gather up into the sleeve head rather than at the bottom of the sleeve. So I'm just going to work it up, and then I'm going to be comparing the size of the sleeve head to the armhole. So I lowered the tension as I was stitching my gathering stitch, which is making it a little bit easier to move everything along. I'm just going to get my bodice. So I've got my bodice sleeve, which my bodice is going to go into. I'm just putting a couple of pins onto the side that my sleeve is going in to. I can see already that the sleeve is still too big to fit in. So just feed a bit more of the gather in. So I'm going to go from this side and gather in. I'll zoom out a little bit so you can see. So what I'm aiming for is that the gather is in the sleeve head rather than in the underarm of the sleeve. So it looks as though I'm getting there now with the amount of gathers. So I'm just going to knot off one side and then ease my gathers through, making sure that they are the same size. So that's roughly the right size. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to knot the thread. And I'm going to ease my gather around. So move my gather around so it's at the top of the sleeve. Making sure that my gathers are equal. So and then I'm gonna put, so my sleeve at the minute is the right way out, so I'm gonna turn my garment the wrong way out, and I'm gonna match the underarm seams so it's right sides together. So my sleeve is inside my armhole. And then start to pin my sleeve head in. So I'm gonna still bring my sleeve head out and around, and pin this on the sleeve side. So now that's pinned in. I'm going to stitch on the machine. So I'm going to stitch on the gathered side on the sleeve head so I can see and be in control of my gathers. So all the time making sure that I'm pulling the gathers so that they're laid straight, nothing's getting tucked up underneath. So all the time working the gathers. And so if you just go around, check your sleeve, make sure you've not left any pins in, and you should have a really nice gathered sleeve. Wow, look at the volume on that. Okay, so the next and final step is the collar. So we've put on, there's two pieces, two collars. One's obviously got piping in, the other one hasn't. So what I'm going to do on the centre back opening is I'm going to press back my seam allowance like I did on the other sample. Just so I can, because we're not doing any facings or finishings for the openings, because it was all about the cuffs and the sleeves, we'll just press back and imagine that if we need anything attached to it, it's there. And so we want the right side of the neckline. So we're going to mark the centre front of both of the centre front of the neck, the centre point of the neck, and the back obviously the seam's open, so we know where that is. I'm just going to bring the shoulders together, shoulder seams together, and mark in the halfway point. So shoulders together. Marking the halfway point. So that's my halfway point. So that'll be where the collar is going to sit. So that's my front. Go that side. So where my centimetre seam allowance is, that's my actual stitch line. So if I measure down and put a marker a centimetre from the top, that point there is the point that I want my collars to sit and match up. Because that is where it's going to get stitched to. Try again. Third time lucky. Get this collar in. Okay, so now where I've pinned, I'm going to stitch. And so flat stitched, so that's flat collar stitched on, and so now you need either a facing or bias binding just to finish off the neckline for this sample. So if you was doing a facing, obviously everything would fall in and the collar would sit and be neatened. I'm going to get some bias binding and run it round and fold it in the same way. So the bias binding will sit on the inside. You won't see it on the outside. So I'm going to get some pre-made bias. So I'm going to press my bias binding open and use it to neaten off the neckline. So it's kind of a go-between between facing and binding. So press it open and I'm going to be pinning the right side of the binding to the right side of the collar and stitching that in place all the way round. So it is very silky and it does move. So if you make sure you put a couple of pins in, but this is the good thing about bias binding is that it's designed to go around corners. So stitch, pin all the way through. So I've pinned that in place. I'm going to stitch it. So that is the binding stitched on. So we're going to press up into the neckline. Now we've got the binding on, we're going to fold it round. So there's two different ways. You can either do it so you see the binding on the right side, so you just fold it over, or you can do it so you don't see the binding, so you'd fold the seam allowance down and it would sit into the collar. So if you're doing it where the binding is not going to be seen, you're going to have to cut into the collar and cut out, clip it down so that it will open out when it turns back round. So when the neckline comes round and folds down, just fastening down the binding. So I've wrapped, encased the seam allowance, but the seam allowance is coming and stitching down. And so you would run round here with a slip stitch. It's not the best way if you've got a Peter Pan collar, because you want a good structured facing. But for your sample, it's a nice way that you can finish off your neckline. So it's nice and neat. That little bit there, I've just caught it. But yeah, so hand stitch in place. So it's nice and neat. And what I'll do is I will get some photographs of this finished. So that's the last step of this tutorial. So send me some pictures. I hope that yours look great. And hopefully see you in some future classes. Let's just fold that and see this. Nice puff sleeve with a nice Peter Pan collar sitting onto the shoulder. There we go. Well done, everybody.